Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. This video is going to be looking at my reading stats for the year and then comparing it to previous years, because a lot of these are things that I've been tracking for a number of years. I now have 6 years worth of statistics to show you. I am just looking down here because my laptop's on my lap and I am just rotating up the screen so I can go through things. Am I going to have enough room? Yeah. So first of all, I will go through all of the trends that I found in my reading just from 2023. And the first one being the number of novels that I read versus the number of comics. So this tends to be quite standard. I wasn't too surprised when it came out to be a quarter. Next we have amount of non-fiction compared to fiction. I always read more fiction. I do pick up a couple of non-fictions though, so some of these would have been memoirs, some of these would have been books like on a particular topic. Next we have the number of books that I read split into whether or not I want to buy a copy and whether or not they were from my already established shelf. This will be more important for my goals video. So with the owned already, I haven't split this into books that I read in 2023 and then bought a copy because I didn't want to go through all that. Also, something that I did this year is to include all of my rereads as separate reads. So maybe next year I'll change that back to having all of the rereads count as one in here because it, I think, inflates the to-haul stat a bit. Next we have my genre breakdown. So as usual, I tend to read mostly fantasy, with contemporary being I was about to say close second, it's not very close, with being the second. But also the thing is with contemporary fiction is that a lot of books that don't have a defined other genre just tend to go into contemporary, so that may inflate that. But when people ask me for my favourite genre, I do say fantasy. I don't know if I'd actually class it as my favourite, but it's certainly the genre that I pick up the most of. Does that make it my favourite? I don't know. So next we have all the books that I read split up by star rating. So I did have things all across the star rating spectrum, but I had way more 4 and 5 stars than anything below that, which I'm really happy with. I'm glad that I'm really getting to know my reading taste. I had a lot of DNFs this year though, so I class my DNFs as 0 stars because they're unfinished, so I would have more there if those were part of this list. Also, the fact that if I had actually gone through and read all those DNFs, I think I would have had a lot more 2 and 3 stars. So overall, really happy with this. Also, this was pulled straight from the Goodreads website, so if I reread a book, it doesn't appear multiple times in the way that this graphic is combined. So if I included my rereads in this, again, the 4 and 5 stars would be even higher, which is good. And now we're looking at the trends between all of the years that I have been tracking that. So last year I had the best reading year I've ever had in terms of just number of books, and I was never really forcing myself to be reading at any point. It's always been a hobby for me, and I think just throughout the year I was very much in the mood to read a lot of the time. So I hope that continues. Page-wise, that trend is also shown here, that I read the most number of pages last year, but I think that's very reflective of the number of books. So here we have the average page count. I tend to be fairly consistent. I like short fiction. A lot of the books I tend to pick up and seek out tend to be this sort of like weird queer novella style of book. I also read a lot of plays. I do read the occasional longer book, but overall I do average out at quite a low amount of pages per book. Also, if you were around last year and saw these numbers or these stats and they're slightly changed, over this year there was a couple of things that I remembered that I didn't track, and so I put them onto Goodreads, so a couple of these numbers will have shifted. Next we have my average star rating over the years. Tends to be very consistent, around a 4, and that continued to be the case this year. I'm very happy with that. Also, relatively consistent with the number of comics versus the number of books. I tend to read between a quarter and a half comics versus 3/4 to a half novels. I find that in years where I have a lot of other stuff going on, that the number of comics tends to increase, but every year comics make up quite a substantial portion of my reading. Now we have the number of books that I DNF'd, and this was fairly consistent up until about 2021, where it then shot up. And I thought that last year was quite a high number, but this year trumped that as well. So after I discovered BookTube, I sort of discovered BookTube, I think around 2018, I started picking up a lot more books that I had just heard of because of BookTube. And then a couple of years later, I started getting different book apps, especially audiobook apps, which made it very easy to just try something to see how I felt about it. And because I'm so willing to try out something that I think I might not like, or I haven't heard much about, or maybe in a genre that I don't normally pick up, I very quickly know if a book's not going to be for me, so I tend to give up on it. Also, over the past 2 years, I've really gone through my comic collection, and like if I owned a volume that wasn't volume 1, I would then try and find volume 1 online, and it meant that I got rid of quite a number of my comics as well because I found that they just weren't for me. So this isn't surprising to me. Like, this number doesn't bother me. I think that the fact that in deciding not to finish books and I still have such a high average rating and I still have so many wins, I think is a good thing, even if it means I'm a bit picky. I don't think I'm explaining myself properly here, so I'm just going to pop in and say that what I mean is, because I have such a high average rating with the books that I do read and finish, it must mean that I just know my taste really well, so I'm happy with the books that I DNF. And lastly, my most shameful one, and that is the number of books I hauled versus the number of books I unhauled. I don't remember whether or not this is part of my goals video, but I try to at least have this be the same number across a year, if not getting rid of more books than I haul, because of the fact that, yes, moving to this space and putting up these shelves meant that I now have a lot more shelf space than I ever have before, but that is still finite and I don't want to just keep on adding books ad infinitum. This year was the first in 3 years that I've been tracking this where I hauled more books than I unhauled. I think this is the smallest number of books I've unhauled within a year, and it looks like I hauled over 150 books, so that is not great. Although, because of the way that I've very much switched up my my buying habits over the past couple of years, I think it would be interesting for me to look at how many of those books that I hauled were going onto my TBR or onto my red shelf, because of the fact that before, if I heard of a book, I put it onto my Amazon wishlist and I would often buy it without reading it first, and then I was having quite a number of books that I was getting rid of because of that. Now, if I find a book that sounds really interesting, I put it on my radar shelf on Goodreads rather than somewhere where I could buy it, and then I only tend to buy it without reading it if I see it really cheaply, like in a charity shop. And so a lot of my haul this year, I would assume, is books that I have read and loved. So I think seeing whether or not my to read shelf has gone down or up or stayed the same would be an interesting indicator of that. And there we have it. That's quite a short video and may not be very interesting for anyone but me, but I really enjoy making these videos. I really enjoy looking at these trends, and also I really like looking at how my reading has changed or not over the years that I've been reading extensively. And so do let me know if any of these things are trends that you look at in your reading, or whether or not you just read to read. I know that not everyone that I meet is a stats nerd like me, so I will see you in my next video. Bye.